The morning sun was just beginning to warm the private aviation terminal when Dr. Maya Thompson pulled up in her navy blue Tesla Model S. She checked her watch, 7:15 a.m., exactly 45 minutes before her scheduled departure. Being early was a habit she had developed over her 15 years as a neurosurgeon, and today was no different. The terminal's glass doors reflected her image as she approached. A tall, confident black woman in her early 40s, wearing a crisp white blazer over a blue silk blouse and tailored black pants. Her natural hair was styled in neat, professional twists, and she carried a leather laptop bag along with a small designer suitcase. Maya had triple-checked everything the night before. Her presentation files for the medical conference were backed up on both her laptop and the USB drive. Her hospital's travel department had sent all the booking confirmations, and she had printed extra copies just in case. Even her surgical team knew she would be away for the next 3 days, with Dr. Chen covering her patients. As she walked through the parking lot, Maya noticed how different this terminal was from the main airport she usually used. The private aviation area was smaller, quieter, and clearly designed for a more exclusive group of travelers. Several expensive cars were parked nearby: Bentleys, Porsches, and even a Rolls-Royce. Maya couldn't help but smile, remembering how far she had come from her childhood in a small apartment above her parents' bookstore in Detroit. Her phone buzzed with a message from the conference organizers. They were excited about her keynote speech on the latest developments in pediatric neurosurgery. Maya had pioneered a new technique that had already saved dozens of young lives, and she was looking forward to sharing it with other surgeons from around the country. The clicking of her low heels echoed across the polished floor as she entered the terminal. Inside, everything spoke of luxury: leather chairs, marble counters, and fresh flowers in crystal vases. A few other travelers sat in the waiting area, most of them older white men in expensive suits. Some glanced up as she entered, then quickly returned to their phones or laptops. Maya approached the check-in counter, where a young woman was typing on a computer. Her name tag reads Sarah. Maya pulled out her ID and travel documents, arranging them neatly as she had done countless times before. The morning light streaming through the large windows caught the silver thread in her blazer, making it shimmer slightly. "Good morning," Maya said warmly, sliding her documents across the counter. "I'm Dr. Thompson. I have a chartered flight to Chicago scheduled for 8 a.m. Her voice carried the same calm authority she used in the operating room, clear and confident without being overbearing. Sarah began processing her documents, and Maya used the moment to check her phone again. There was a message from her mother wishing her good luck with the presentation, followed by several pictures of her sister's new baby. Maya smiled at the photos, thinking about how she had helped deliver her niece just 2 weeks ago. The terminal was starting to get busier. A couple with matching Louis Vuitton luggage walked in, followed by what looked like a corporate group heading for a business meeting. The smell of expensive coffee drifted from a small cafe in the corner, mixing with the subtle scent of leather and air conditioning. Maya felt good about the day ahead. She had prepared thoroughly for her presentation, her travel arrangements were in order, and she was looking forward to sharing her medical breakthrough with colleagues. After 15 years of hard work and dedication, moments like these, standing in an exclusive terminal, heading to give a keynote speech at a major conference, felt like confirmation that she had earned her place at the top of her field. Little did she know that in the next few minutes, everything about this perfectly planned morning was about to change. As Sarah finished processing her documents, a security guard was making his way across the terminal floor, his face set in a hard expression that would soon turn this routine morning into something very different. Brett Collins had worked as a security guard at the private aviation terminal for 3 years, and he had very fixed ideas about who belonged there. As he watched Dr. Maya Thompson collecting her processed documents from Sarah at the check-in counter, his face hardened into a frown. He walked quickly across the polished floor, his boots making heavy sounds with each step. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop right there," Collins said loudly, positioning himself between Maya and the entrance to the boarding area. His voice carried across the terminal, making several travelers look up from their phones and laptops. Maya turned to face him calmly, her documents still in hand. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice steady and professional. Collins crossed his arms, looking down at her despite them being almost the same height. "Yeah, there's a problem. I'm going to need to see some real proof that you're supposed to be here." His emphasis on the word real made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Of course, Maya replied, extending her documentation. Here's my ID, booking confirmation, and medical credentials. I'm Dr. Thompson, and I'm scheduled for the 8 a.m. flight to Chicago. Collins barely glanced at the papers. Anyone can print fancy papers, he said with a sneer. Where did you really get these from? This is a private aviation terminal, not the regular airport. His hand rested meaningfully on his security badge. Sarah, the check-in clerk, stood up behind her counter. Sir, I've just verified Dr. Thompson's credentials. Everything is in order for her flight. Stay out of this, Collins snapped at Sarah, then turned back to Maya. Listen here, this terminal is for certain kinds of people. Important people. Business executives. Maybe you got confused and walked into the wrong building? Maya took a deep breath, her fingers tightening slightly on her leather laptop bag. She had faced discrimination before, but rarely this blatant. Sir, I am a neurosurgeon heading to Chicago to deliver a keynote speech at a medical conference. My credentials have been verified, and my flight is booked and paid for. There's no confusion here. Collins let out a harsh laugh. A neurosurgeon? Right. And I'm the President of the United States. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. Why don't you just walk away now, before this becomes a bigger problem? More people were watching now. A businessman in an expensive suit had stopped typing on his laptop and was recording the interaction on his phone. Two flight attendants whispered to each other near the cafe, looking concerned. I'd like to speak to your supervisor, Maya said firmly, maintaining eye contact with Collins. Your behavior is unprofessional and unacceptable. My supervisor. Collins smiled coldly. Lady, I am the supervisor on duty right now, and I'm telling you that you need to leave. Now. Maya stood her ground, her heart racing, but her exterior calm. I will not leave. I have every right to be here, and your assumptions about me are based solely on the color of my skin. This is discrimination, and I'm documenting everything. Collins' face reddened. Are you threatening me? I could have you arrested for trespassing. He reached for his radio, but his hand was shaking slightly. The terminal had grown eerily quiet. Even the soft background music seemed to have faded away. Maya pulled out her phone and began recording, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her body. Officer Collins, she said clearly, making sure her phone captured his name badge. I want to be very clear. I am Dr. Maya Thompson, Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Detroit Memorial Hospital. I have shown you valid identification, booking confirmation, and medical credentials. Your refusal to acknowledge these documents and your hostile behavior appear to be racially motivated. I am well within my rights to be here, and I am not leaving. Collins' radio crackled to life. Someone had called for backup, but as he reached to respond, a familiar voice cut through the tense atmosphere, about to change everything. The private aviation terminal, usually a place of quiet luxury, was now buzzing with tension. As Officer Collins continued his confrontation with Dr. Maya Thompson, people began gathering around them like moths to a flame. The morning sun streaming through the terminal's large windows illuminated the scene like a spotlight on a stage. James Chen, a young tech executive, was the first to start recording on his phone. His hands trembled slightly as he captured the unfolding drama. Next to him, an elderly woman in expensive pearls whispered to her husband, "This is absolutely disgraceful," loud enough for others to hear. The terminal manager, Robert Pierce, watched from his office window upstairs. He kept adjusting his tie nervously, unsure whether to intervene. His eyes darted between the growing crowd, Collins' aggressive stance, and Dr. Thompson's composed figure in her white blazer. Sarah, the check-in clerk, had already pressed the silent alarm under her desk. Her fingers hovered over the phone, ready to call airport security. She caught Dr. Thompson's eye and gave a small nod of support, feeling ashamed that she couldn't do more. The crowd grew larger by the minute. Flight crews paused their pre-flight checks to watch. A group of businessmen set aside their laptops, their morning meetings forgotten. Two janitors stopped mopping the floor, their bucket and mop abandoned near the cafe. Someone should do something, a flight attendant whispered to her colleague. Her comment rippled through the crowd, but no one stepped forward. Instead, more phones came out, recording the incident from different angles. the soft clicks of camera shutters mixed with the hushed whispers of disapproval. A small girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking loudly, "Mommy, why is that man being mean to the lady?" Her mother quickly hushed her, but the question hung in the air, making several onlookers shift uncomfortably. The terminal's cafe barista, Maria Rodriguez, carefully made her way through the crowd with a cup of water, placing it quietly on the counter near Dr. Thompson. It was a small gesture of solidarity, but it spoke volumes. Collins glared at her, but she met his gaze steadily before stepping back. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every time Collins moved closer to Dr. Thompson, the crowd collectively held its breath. When he raised his voice, several people flinched. Yet Dr. Thompson remained steady, her phone still recording, her dignity intact. Some travelers began making calls, speaking in urgent whispers. "You won't believe what I'm seeing right now," one man said into his phone. Another was already posting the video on social media, his fingers flying over his screen. A group of pilots in their crisp uniforms gathered near the boarding gate, discussing the situation in low voices. One of them kept looking at Dr. Thompson with a puzzled expression, as if trying to place her face from somewhere. The terminal's regular morning activities had come to a complete standstill. The check-in counter was deserted except for Sarah. The security screening area stood empty. Even the cleaning cart sat abandoned, its yellow, wet floor sign standing like a lonely sentinel. The crowd had formed a loose circle around Collins and Dr. Thompson, creating an impromptu arena. Some people stood with their arms crossed, others with their hands over their mouths. A few were shaking their heads in disbelief. The only sound was Collins' increasingly aggressive voice and Dr. Thompson's calm responses. Suddenly, the pilot who had been studying Dr. Thompson's face stepped forward, his eyes wide with recognition. The crowd parted to let him through, and the atmosphere in the terminal shifted once again, like the moment before a storm breaks. Dr. Maya Thompson had faced discrimination many times in her life, but never quite like this. As she stood in the private aviation terminal with Officer Collins looming over her, she remembered her mother's words from years ago. "Your dignity is your armor, and your actions speak louder than any insult." While Collins continued his aggressive behavior, Maya kept her composure, her hands steady as she held her phone to record the incident. Her white blazer remained crisp, her stance professional, even as her heart raced beneath her calm exterior. "Officer Collins," she spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the silent terminal, "I want to document that you have refused to accept my valid credentials 3 times now. The time is 7:35 a.m., and you have prevented me from accessing my scheduled flight despite having proper documentation." Collins' face reddened further. "Are you some kind of lawyer now, too?" He sneered, but there was a slight tremor in his voice. He hadn't expected such a composed response to his intimidation. Maya took out her business cards from her leather bag, holding them up so the crowd could see the hospital's official logo. "I am Dr. Maya Thompson, Chief of Pediatric Neurosurgery at Detroit Memorial Hospital. Anyone here is welcome to verify my credentials." She began distributing the cards to nearby onlookers, her movements deliberate and graceful. Several people reached out eagerly, some already pulling up the hospital's website on their phones to confirm her identity. "My surgical team is expecting me in Chicago by noon," Maya continued, her voice steady. "There are children whose lives depend on the knowledge I'm supposed to share at this medical conference. Every minute you delay me here potentially affects their futures." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Maya noticed Sarah, the check-in clerk, nodding encouragingly from behind her counter. The young woman's eyes were filled with admiration. Maya pulled up her hospital's website on her phone, showing her profile page with her photograph and credentials. "Officer Collins, would you like to see the hundreds of successful surgeries I performed? Or perhaps the research papers I published? Or maybe the thank you letters from parents whose children are alive today because of the technique I developed?" Collins shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado beginning to crack, but Maya wasn't finished. She pulled out a folder from her laptop bag and opened it carefully. "These are photos of my patients," she said softly but clearly. "Children of every race, color, and background. When I'm in the operating room, saving their lives, do you know what never crosses my mind? The color of their skin, or mine." The terminal was so quiet you could hear the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Maya's words hung in the air, powerful in their simplicity and truth. "I will not raise my voice," she continued. I will not respond to your provocations with anger. Instead, I'm going to stand here, calmly and professionally, documenting every word and action, because that's what professionals do. That's what leaders do. And most importantly, that's what changemakers do. She checked her watch again, her movements unhurried. It's now 7:40 a.m. I have 20 minutes until my scheduled departure. I suggest you use this time wisely, Officer Collins, because one way or another, this situation will be resolved. The only question is how much damage you want to do to your career in the process. Captain Michael Rodriguez pushed through the crowd, his pilot's uniform crisp and authoritative. His face showed a mix of disbelief and recognition as he walked straight toward Dr. Thompson. The terminal fell even quieter, if that was possible, as everyone watched this new development unfold. Dr. Thompson? He called out, his voice filled with emotion. Dr. Maya Thompson from Detroit Memorial? He was walking faster now, almost running. Officer Collins tried to step between them, but Captain Rodriguez held up his hand, displaying the 4 stripes on his sleeve. Stand down, officer. I know this woman. Maya looked at the pilot, taking the moment to place his face. Then her eyes widened with recognition. Mr. Rodriguez? Little Sophia's father? Yes, Captain Rodriguez's eyes were shining now. Everyone, he turned to address the crowd, his voice strong with conviction. This woman saved my daughter's life 8 months ago. Sophia had a brain tumor that 3 other surgeons said was inoperable. He pulled out his phone, quickly finding a photo and holding it up for everyone to see. On the screen was a smiling young girl, about 7 years old, wearing a ballet tutu. This is my Sophia, dancing at her recital last week. Dancing. The other doctors said she would never walk again, let alone dance. Collins shifted uncomfortably, but he tried to maintain his authority. That doesn't prove anything. Anyone can show pictures. Shut up, someone in the crowd shouted, and others nodded in agreement. Captain Rodriguez wasn't finished. He faced Collins directly now, his voice trembling with barely controlled anger. Dr. Thompson spent 11 hours in surgery saving my daughter. 11 hours. She didn't take a single break. She stood there operating while most of us were sleeping comfortably in our beds. He turned back to Maya, his voice softening. Dr. Thompson, I didn't recognize you at first because last time I saw you, you were in surgical scrubs. Sophia still talks about the way you drew a little smiley face on her bandage after the surgery. Maya smiled warmly, remembering. Sophia was one of my bravest patients. She told me jokes even when she was scared. More people were pushing forward now, phones searching furiously. A businessman raised his hand excitedly. I found her. Look at this article from the Detroit Medical Journal. Dr. Maya Thompson pioneers revolutionary pediatric brain surgery technique. He turned his laptop around, showing Maya's professional headshot on the screen. Another woman gasped. My sister's friend's son was her patient too. She did that miracle surgery last year, remember? The one that made the local news. Collins was backing away now, his face pale. The terminal manager, Robert Pierce, finally hurried down from his office, straightening his tie as he approached. Captain Rodriguez put his hand on Maya's shoulder. Dr. Thompson, I'm flying to Chicago today too. It would be my honor to have you on my aircraft. He turned to the crowd. This woman is not just a doctor. She's a miracle worker. My Sophia calls her the angel doctor because of how she explains everything with such kindness, even to scared little kids. The other pilots who had been watching joined him, forming a protective semicircle around Maya. Collins tried to speak again, but the terminal manager cut him off. Officer Collins, Pierce said sharply, report to my office immediately. He turned to Maya, bowing slightly. Dr. Thompson, please accept our deepest apologies. This is not what our terminal stands for. But Captain Rodriguez wasn't done. He pulled out his phone again, showing more pictures. This is Sophia's first day back at school, her first ballet class after recovery, her winning the science fair last month. His voice cracked. My daughter is alive and thriving because of Dr. Thompson. And you, he turned to Collins, his voice hard. You tried to stop her from helping other children like my Sophia. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause, the sound echoing off the terminal's high ceilings. The morning sun caught the wings of a plane taking off outside, its reflection creating a brief halo effect around Maya's composed figure. The private aviation terminal's glass doors swung open as Chief of Security David Marshall strode in, his polished badge gleaming under the morning lights. His quick steps echoed across the marble floor as he approached the gathered crowd, two senior security officers following close behind. The terminal manager, Robert Pierce, rushed to meet him. "Chief Marshall, we have a situation." "I'm well aware." Chief Marshall cut him off, his voice stern. He had already watched several videos of the incident, which were spreading rapidly across social media. His tablet showed 15 new messages from airport administration, all marked urgent. He made his way through the crowd, which parted like water. Officer Collins stood rigid, his face now pale and sweating. Dr. Thompson remained exactly where she had been, her dignity intact, surrounded by Captain Rodriguez and his fellow pilots. "Dr. Thompson," Chief Marshall addressed her directly, his tone respectful. "I'm David Marshall, Chief of Security for this airport. I've just reviewed multiple video recordings of this incident, and I want to personally apologize for this unacceptable situation." Maya nodded gracefully, still maintaining her professional composure. The crowd watched in complete silence as Chief Marshall turned to face Collins, his expression hardening. "Officer Collins, hand over your badge and radio immediately," he ordered. The words rang through the terminal like a judge's gavel. "You are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation." Collins' hands shook as he unpinned his badge. "But sir, I was just following." "Following what?" Chief Marshall's voice was sharp enough to cut steel. "Following your prejudices, your biases, because you certainly weren't following protocol, airport policies, or basic human decency." A senior security officer stepped forward to collect Collins' badge and radio. The crowd watched with satisfaction as Collins' authority literally unpinned itself from his chest. "Dr. Thompson," Chief Marshall continued, turning back to Maya, "please allow me to escort you personally to your aircraft." "Captain Rodriguez, is everything ready for departure?" "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied. "We've already arranged for Dr. Thompson's bags to be loaded. We can take off as soon as she's aboard." The applause started slowly at first, a few claps from the back of the crowd. Then it grew, spreading through the terminal like a wave. People stood up from their seats, hands coming together in a thunderous show of support. Some were wiping tears from their eyes, others were smiling broadly. Sarah, the check-in clerk, had come out from behind her counter to join the applause. The cafe barista who had brought water earlier was cheering. Even the cleaning staff had stopped their work to participate in this moment of justice. Maya felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about something bigger. "Before we go," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I want to say something." The applause died down as people leaned in to listen. "What happened here today isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. It's about every professional who has had to prove themselves twice as hard to be taken half as seriously." She paused, looking around the terminal. "But it's also about all of you. Every person who recorded this incident, who spoke up, who refused to be a silent bystander. Change happens when good people choose not to be quiet." The applause erupted again, even louder than before. As Chief Marshall began to escort her toward the boarding area, people reached out to shake her hand or touch her shoulder. Several parents held up their phones, asking if they could get her contact information for their children who wanted to become doctors. Collins stood alone now, stripped of his badge and authority, watching as Dr. Thompson walked past him with her head held high, surrounded by respect and admiration, everything he had tried to deny her. As Chief Marshall prepared to escort Dr. Thompson to her flight, she raised her hand gently, indicating she had more to say. The crowd, which had been starting to disperse, quickly regathered. There was something about her presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "I'd like to speak with the airport management team," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the terminal. "Not to file a complaint, but to offer a solution." Robert Pierce, the terminal manager, stepped forward eagerly. "Of course, Dr. Thompson. We can set up a meeting immediately after your return from Chicago." Maya shook her head softly. "No, I'd like to do this now." She checked her watch. "We have 15 minutes until my scheduled departure. That's enough time to plant the seeds of change." She walked over to the terminal's small conference room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The crowd followed, like a congregation following their minister. The room, usually reserved for private business meetings, quickly filled up with airport staff, travelers, and curious onlookers. What we witnessed today, Maya began, standing at the head of the conference table, isn't just about one security guard's actions. It's about a system that allowed those actions to happen. She opened her laptop, quickly pulling up statistics she had researched for her medical diversity initiatives. Did you know that incidents of discrimination at private aviation terminals are rarely reported? Not because they don't happen, but because victims feel powerless to speak up. The terminal manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Maya's tone wasn't accusatory, it was constructive. I propose we create a training program, she continued, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she outlined her thoughts. Not just another mandatory diversity seminar, but real, practical training. I'm willing to help develop it, using this incident as a case study. Captain Rodriguez, who had stayed to support her despite his flight schedule, spoke up. Dr. Thompson, you're already so busy saving lives. Are you sure you want to take this on too? Maya smiled warmly. Captain, every time I operate on a child's brain, I'm not just fixing their immediate problem, I'm giving them a future. This is no different. We're not just fixing today's incident, we're creating a better future for everyone who will pass through these terminals. She projected her laptop screen onto the conference room wall, displaying a quick outline she had just created. The airport staff leaned forward, impressed by her organizational skills even in this emotional moment. First, she explained, pointing to her outline, we need a clear reporting system for discrimination incidents. Second, we need regular training that includes real-world scenarios. Third, we need a diverse advisory board to oversee these changes. The chief of security nodded approvingly. Dr. Thompson, would you consider being part of this advisory board? Yes, but with one condition, she replied. I want this program to be shared with other private aviation terminals across the country. What happened to me today happens to others who might not have the platform or privilege I have to speak up. A young black flight attendant in the back of the room raised her hand timidly. Dr. Thompson, I've worked here for 3 years, and I've seen things, but I've always been afraid to say anything. Maya walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. That ends today. Your voice matters. Everyone's voice matters. The terminal manager was already making calls to airport administration. The chief of security was taking detailed notes. Sarah, the check-in clerk, was recording everything on her tablet. This morning, Maya concluded, gathering her things as her departure time approached. Someone tried to stop me from boarding a plane to share medical knowledge that could save children's lives. Instead, they've given us an opportunity to save something else, our dignity, our integrity, and our humanity. As she finished speaking, the room burst into applause once again, but this time, it wasn't just applause, it was the sound of change beginning. 3 months after the incident at the private aviation terminal, Dr. Maya Thompson sat in her office at Detroit Memorial Hospital, reviewing emails on her laptop. The afternoon sun streamed through her window, illuminating the many thank you cards from patients that decorated her walls. But now, mixed among the children's drawings and grateful parent letters were messages of a different kind. Her inbox was filled with updates from airports across the country. The training program she had proposed that morning in the terminal conference room had grown into something much bigger than anyone expected. What became known as the Thompson Protocol was now being implemented at private aviation terminals in 27 states. On her desk lay the latest aviation industry magazine with her photo on the cover. The headline read, From Discrimination to Direction, How One Doctor's Experience Changed Private Aviation. Maya smiled, remembering how her medical colleagues had joked that she was now famous in 2 completely different fields. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, the check-in clerk from that day, who had since been promoted to head of customer relations at the terminal. Dr. Thompson, you won't believe our latest numbers. Discrimination complaints down 78% since implementing your program. The terminal where the incident happened had transformed completely. Officer Collins' replacement was a young woman named Janet Chen, who had graduated top of her class from the new security training program. The advisory board Maya had suggested now included pilots, ground staff, and travelers from diverse backgrounds. Captain Rodriguez, who had recognized her that day, had become one of the program's most passionate advocates. He regularly shared the story of his daughter Sophia's surgery during training sessions, showing how preconceptions and prejudices could have prevented his daughter from being saved. Maya opened her calendar to check her schedule. Between surgeries and medical conferences, she now had regular speaking engagements at aviation industry events. Next week, she would be addressing the National Aviation Security Conference about expanding the Thompson Protocol to regular commercial airports. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. It was Dr. Chen, her surgical colleague, with an excited look on his face. "Maya, you need to see this." He held up his tablet, showing a news website. The article described how a young black medical student had been inspired by Dr. Thompson's story to pursue her dream of becoming a neurosurgeon. She had just been accepted into one of the country's top medical schools. In her acceptance interview, she had cited the terminal incident as the moment she realized nothing could stop her from achieving her goals. Maya's email notification chimed again. This time it was from the terminal manager, Robert Pierce. He was sharing photos from their latest graduation ceremony. 30 new security officers trained under the Thompson Protocol. The graduating class looked like a beautiful tapestry of humanity. Different races, ages, and backgrounds, all committed to treating everyone with dignity and respect. The last 3 months had brought other changes too. The video of the incident, which had gone viral that morning, had sparked a national conversation about privilege and access in private aviation. Other industries had begun reaching out, asking Maya to help them develop similar training programs. She picked up a framed photo on her desk, a group picture from last week's hospital fundraiser. In it, she stood with Sophia, Captain Rodriguez's daughter, who was now completely cancer-free and dreaming of becoming a doctor herself. Sophia wore a tiny lab coat that Maya had given her, with "Future Dr. Rodriguez" embroidered on the pocket. Looking out her office window at the hospital helipad, Maya watched a medical transport helicopter land smoothly. The same skills she used in surgery, staying calm under pressure, focusing on solutions rather than problems, and treating everyone with dignity, had helped her turn a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. Her office phone rang. It was the governor's office, calling to discuss implementing the Thompson Protocol across all state transportation facilities. Maya took a deep breath and picked up the receiver, ready to continue the work of transforming one difficult morning into lasting positive change. The incident that could have stopped her from boarding a plane had instead launched her on an unexpected journey, one that was helping others soar to new heights of understanding and respect.